Hi, I'm Elizabeth, this is the Bookish North. Welcome to my channel. Today, to exactly nobody's big surprise, there's a book haul. If you have watched my vlogs from the summer, you will know I visited a lot of bookshops over the summer. And today I'm going to show you the loot from those visits. I'm going to show you the books, tell you why I bought them. That's the drill. And also, yes, new hair as of yesterday. I'm kind of happy with it. But yeah, you're not here for hair, you're here for books, so let's get to that. Ogres of Innocence by Patti Smith. This is a poetry collection, and I know I say this every time I haul a poetry collection, but I'm gonna say it again. I really do struggle with reading poetry in English, but I keep wanting to try, and I have read some of Patti Smith's non-fiction, which I have absolutely adored, so I want to try some of her poetry as well and see how I get along with it. Daydream and Drunkenness of a Young Lady by Clarice Lispector. This is one of those small Penguin Modern Classic editions. I keep acquiring books by Clarice Lispector because I'm expecting I will love her writing. This is yet another option for having a way in to her works. Not sure if this is going to be the one, but maybe because it is just 3 short stories, it will be the easiest way to get a glimpse of her writing. Rasismens Poetic, or The Poetics of Racism by the Norwegian writer Guro Sibeko. This is a book about anti-racism, and I actually had this out from the library when everything shut down earlier this year. I read it, I adored it. I think it's a book I really want to have in my collection, so I bought it. It combines poetry and essays in a way I found very effective, and I'm going to talk more about this in a future wrap-up. Stoic uro og andre filosofiske smuler, or Stoic Unrest and Other Philosophical Crumbs by Agnes Ravatn. This is an essay collection, and it's by Agnes Ravatn. That is basically all that I knew at the time of buying it, and it was all I needed to know because I have read all of Ravatn's other essay collections and I've loved all of them. So I bought this without really knowing what it was about. I have since read it, and I can now tell you that this book collects 2 series of essays that she started for the Norwegian newspaper Dagotid, but she never finished either one of the series. But they both deal with philosophy in a very light-hearted and humoristic way, trying to bring it into her everyday life. And I really did enjoy this as well. Again, more in a future wrap-up. The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. I am working my way through all of her books, and I've just been waiting for this to get out in paperback before buying it. So this was the first time I saw the paperback edition, and I immediately grabbed it. Redemption by Tade Thompson. This is the 3rd book in the Rosewater trilogy, where I have actually only read the first one, Rosewater. I really enjoyed that. It's the story of sort of an alien invasion. It's taking place in Nigeria, and I really liked the playfulness and the inventiveness of the story. I have long ago, well, a year ago or so, bought the 2nd book called Insurrection. So when I saw this, I grabbed this as well, because I do prefer reading my series back to back, and now I can. Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. Last year I read Giovanni's Room, and I absolutely adored it. I think I put it as my favorite book of last year. And this year I've read If Beale Street Could Talk, and I love that just as much. So I'm convinced I need to buy and read all books by James Baldwin. I don't specifically know a lot about what this book is about, and I think I want to keep it that way before actually reading it. But I'm sure it will blow my mind when I get to it, because the other 2 did. Women in the Viking Age by Judith Yesh. This I did not actually buy in a bookshop, but rather in a museum gift shop when I was in Avaldsnes, where there's a museum and this reconstructed Viking farm. They had a lot of books about the Viking Age in the gift shop. Most of them were very touristy or for children and didn't really appeal to me, but this sounded very interesting. It is a academic work. It was written, or it's written on the back that it's the full full book-length survey in English about women in the Viking Age, and I'm all here for that. I have just finished reading this and it was very interesting, and I highly recommend it if this is your cup of tea. Under Big Ben, or Under Big Ben if you want it in English, just change the pronunciation, by the Norwegian writer Richard Herman. Richard Herman was a Norwegian journalist living and working in London. He wrote a lot of books about British politics or culture and history. This is one of them. This is a book about the history of the British Parliament. It's quirky, it's funny, it's very accessible, and after having reread this, I would also say slightly, ever so slightly dated. I'm not sure this will work as a way into English history for the youths of today, but for me, for nostalgic reasons alone, this was still purely enjoyable to read. This was one of the books that got me into history in the first place when reading it in my early teens. So at that time I had all of the books by Herman out of the library, and every time I see one of them in a second-hand bookshop these days, I grab it so that I can collect all of my teenage favorites. The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. I prefer reading English language fantasy or sci-fi in the original, but the only exception I make is for these editions from a Norwegian publishing series called Lanterne. I'm collecting these. I really like the covers from the series, and this was sort of the first real project in Norway where English language sci-fi and fantasy was translated into Norwegian by two pioneers called Bing and Bringsvær. They also wrote a lot of books themselves, and they were sort of the two men driving all the things going on for sci-fi and fantasy in Norway at the time. And so for that reason alone, I bought this in Norwegian. This is a book I'm uncertain on whether I will actually read this actual copy. I want to read the book. I have never actually read this book, but whether I will find an English edition and read that or read this particular copy, not quite sure, but I'm happy to have this for my collection of the Lanterne sci-fi series. A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. This was there. It's in this nice orange penguin edition. It's actually not too battered, and it's a classic, and it was very cheap, so I grabbed it. I mean, it is a book I want to read. It does feel like the probably most accessible of Joyce's books. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I do want to read this, and I liked this edition, and it costs about £1, so what's a girl to do but bring it home. Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. This is the follow-up to Kings of the Wild. I love both of these books. In this book we follow Bloody Rose. As you can see here, she's the leader of a mercenary band, and she brings them into some really dangerous situations, and it's interesting, it's fun, it's fast-paced, and I loved it. The Monster Baturmorant by Seth Dickinson. This is the follow-up to The Traitor Baturmorant, another dark fantasy book. I enjoyed the first one. I wasn't as surprised by the ending as I've heard other people be, but I'm intrigued enough that I want to continue on with the series. So when I saw this, I bought it. I mean, it's not really harder than that sometimes. Hexson, or The Witch by Bergljot Hobek Huff, who is a Norwegian feminist author, and I mean, look at this cover. If that doesn't creep you out, I don't know what will. This is a book I don't know much about it, but everything I've heard about Hobek Huff tells me that her writing should be right up my alley, and I want to try it, and I think maybe this is gonna be the book that becomes my first taste of her writing. Lysistrata by Aristophanes. So this is another book in the Lanterna editions, so I bought it mainly because of that, but also because I really do want to read some Greek dramas, and this seems like a very good place to start based on what kinds of things I like to read about. This is about the females of Athens, I think. Athens. Be tired of not seeing their husbands because they're always off to war, going to strike, denying their husbands sex until they've made peace so that they will be home more. And I really do want to read that. I have, after buying this, read the translator's note, basically saying that this is a bad translation, which I found kind of interesting. But this translation was done in the 1970s, and the person doing the translation is saying that there's still a lot of profanities and stuff in the original that can't be published in a modern day work. So I think maybe I'm going to try to read this edition, and then I'm going to try to find a more modern translation to compare them, because that seems like an interesting project. Claudius the God by Robert Graves. This is the sequel to the famous I, Claudius, and these are both historical novels set in Roman times following the Emperor Claudius. I have read hardly anything from this period of history, and maybe historical fiction is my way in. I mean, I have I, Claudius, now I also have this one. The Bong People by Kerry Holm. This is from New Zealand, and as far as I can tell, by a Maori author. I've heard interesting things about this book, and I've been curious about it, so when I saw it at this second-hand bookshop, I grabbed it immediately. Another Country by James Baldwin. Here my reasoning is the same as before. I really want to read all of his books. I was a bit hesitant about picking up this particular copy just because the print in it is minuscule. I'm not sure how readable this edition is, but it was very cheap, and I'm gonna try, and if it doesn't work out, I can always find another edition later. But yeah, this one I've heard many people say is his best book, so very, very high hopes for this one. Just Above My Head, again by James Baldwin, again the same reasoning. This is a lot chunkier than the other ones, and I have absolutely no idea what to expect from this, because this is a title I hadn't even heard before I saw this. But it was there, so I got it, because I need to read all of his books. Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. This is his memoirs. I read the first 2 pages when I was in the shop, and I love the flow of the prose and his voice in those pages. So I knew I needed to buy this, and I'm really eager to read it. It's a bit of a chunker, but if a book is good, then why wouldn't you want more of it? So happy about my purchase. The Lover by Marguerite Duras, the French writer. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and I actually already do own a copy of it, but that copy is not a very good one. It's not very readable, so when I saw this, I grabbed it, and I'm gonna donate the one I already have. It's about her experience falling in love with a much older Chinese man when she was living in Indochine in her teens. But yeah, I absolutely adore this book, so I'm happy to have a better looking copy. This is even hardback. I usually prefer paperbacks, but I mean, this is so small that I think a hardback of this is what I need. The Plague by Albert Camus. So this is a book I already own, but in a French edition. And I do want to read it in French, but I don't think my French is actually good enough to make sense of the book. So I wanted a Norwegian copy to read alongside the French, because then I will know that I actually get the gist of what I'm reading to support me through, you know, just working my way through a French version, which I can't quite handle yet. So I don't think I'm quite ready to read a novel about a plague right now, but to future me, you're welcome for me buying this for you. London Overground, A Day's Walk Around the Ginger Line by Ian Sinclair. So this is a book pretty much doing what it says on the cover. He's walking around the circle made by the London Overground and describing what he sees. And I couldn't go to London this summer, so instead let's read about it in a book. Not quite the same, but the best I can do for a while still. Solitude, A Pursuit of a Singular Life in a Crowded World by Michael Harris. This was a complete random pick in one of my favorite bookshops called Tronsmo. I had not heard of this book, I knew absolutely nothing about it, but I was drawn in by the title. I always like reading books about being alone, about solitude, particularly if it is cast as something positive. So that drew me in, and you know, the blurb, everything about this made me think, yes, I want to read this book. Have actually read it, we'll talk more about it in a future video, but I did find it interesting, although I would say this book is definitely written by an extrovert with no real experience of being alone or solitude to begin with, but it was fascinating and I'm glad I bought it. Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency by Olivia Lang. I was really wanting this book because I've read all other non-fiction books by Olivia Lang. I've adored all of them. I've also read her novel called Crudo, and I'm still on the fence about what I thought about that a year after reading it. But this one is, as I gather, a collection of criticisms and articles and essays she has written about art. And even if I'm completely clueless when it comes to art, I know that if it's Olivia Lang writing about it, I will find it interesting because I absolutely adore the way she writes non-fiction. So this was a must-buy for me as soon as I saw it. Actually, I went in there looking for it because I wanted it. No shame. The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. So this book I did not actually buy. It was kindly gifted to me by a friend who was clearing out her shelves to get room for more new books. She had read this and really enjoyed it, and I took it out of her hands because I'm so kind and I like to help people tidy their homes, at least when it involves inheriting their books. Let's face it, that's the only kind of tidying I like to do. But you know, this is again from New Zealand. I've heard many great things about it. I've heard it is a book that it takes a while to get into, but you know, with this size, it's probably worth making the time. It's a book I've held in my hands so many times in bookshops, yet I've always put it down, mainly because of its size and mainly because I've been in the UK when seeing it and I haven't wanted to drag it home with me on a plane, and I thought I will buy this book in Norway, and now I don't have to buy it because I was gifted it very kindly by a friend. Thank you, Monica, I will take good care of it. So that was my book haul. I made a promise to myself at the beginning of this year that all books acquired in 2020 should also be read in 2020. And I was actually doing fairly well with that goal. I mean, I did have a massive book haul in February after having been to Hay on Wye, but during these previous months I have been making a good dent in that pile. I've been reading a lot of those books and I felt I was on track to actually accomplishing my goal. And then came the summer and I visited all of these bookshops and I got all of these books, and now all of a sudden that goal seems far away. But we'll see. I'm gonna do my best and see how many of these I get read before the end of the year, and I'm not going to buy more books before that, except maybe one that I know is coming out in September, and I'm not gonna pass on that. But apart from that, hold me to that, will you? And Please let me know if you've read any of these books and think I should prioritize them over any of the others. And until next time, bye bye.